Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is a long due video that I've promised to create explaining the build process of my hum cockpit, which is DIY A320 Neo, actually based from the fly-by-wire A320X aircraft in MS FS 2020. Okay, so before I kind of deep dive into the build process, the details, I would like to give a bit more background why I tried to build this one. So basically, back in the days, I think a year ago, more than a year ago. Before that, I was starting from, I think almost like 3 years ago, 3 or 4 years ago. I started to build some cockpits from uh, cars, cockpits, very simple, using Joy to controller, and I tried to build another DCS Multi Cockpit. So same thing, using the Joy 2 control. So basically, it has like four Arduino Joy 2 controller. So it's kind of like just a multi joystick kind of setup, but it's with a lot of buttons, customized buttons. So for example, in these pictures, you can see there's the first DCS multi cockpit. So I can play FA-18, F-16, or Harrier, Mirage, and other aircraft. I try to simulate as many as possible combinations, or A10. So that's another good aircraft, but it's too flexible, too multi. So basically, I lose kind of a good positional tactile feedback from the original cockpit, right? So the positioning of the switch is a compromise. So I didn't like it. This is for VR, by the way, so it's not for using a screen. Mainly for VR. Back then, it's very difficult to know where the button is. That's why if you see, there's a black dot in each button, and there's a kind of like a sticker, protruding sticker, so you can see, you can feel which button is in the center button or in the topmost button, those kind of things. So I try to touch and feel during VR because you cannot see the buttons, right? So it's very difficult, and I don't too much like it because it's kind of lost the buttons among complicated dense button, as you can see in the pictures. So from there, I move on into a more correct or more precise cockpit. So this one also for VR. So the display is not functional. The MFD is not light up. Those maps actually is just a printed color paper. But there's light effect in the cockpit, so you can switch on the lights, but it's just for fun, not for real purposes in the cockpit itself. So basically, you are in the VR, but this time, because it's mostly accurate on the position of the switches, the type of buttons, knobs, and everything, so you can really get a muscle memory properly to find the buttons. So this one is a better cockpit, definitely, and I do enjoy using it in the DCS using FA-18. Why FA-18? Because there's more versatile aircraft, and I can use for land-based kind of flight, and also carrier-based flight procedure. So it's actually quite good, really quite accurate, really good. I have several videos. You can take a look up here on the playlist, or you can visit my playlist, and you can find a lot of videos when I'm using this cockpit. I'm rarely using it right now because I'm still quite heavy on the MSFS 2020, but this one is a good cockpit. It's almost correct. Okay, even the handlebar, the towel rack, again, when you hold the handle when you are launching from carrier, I created that, and there's a special button just to give a salute near the handle. So this is a second cockpit that I built. So it's quite more demanding. It's more accurate, using precise fabrications, DIY, of course, using acrylics, 3D printing, and everything. But it is nice built. Okay, so it's cosmetically also is very good. Now, but I'm longing for kind of a real feel in the cockpit, right, rather than the VR, because VR, yes, you still have to have a memory where the button is, a muscle memory to know where the button is, right? So I would like to have a cockpit where I can really interact directly in the cockpit. So after that, MSFS come, right? Before that, actually, I've realized before I realized creating the real cockpit, 3D cockpit. I used to build like this. It's a multi-purpose cockpit for MSFS 2020 also. So it's a combination of off-the-shelf product like Thrustmaster, Honeycomb, Bravo, and everything. So it's just put it there. When I want to play jet fighter, I can just switch on, and then switching the center joystick, I can pull out and install again in the middle of the seat. And if I want to play A320 simulation, there's a button there, FCU, FS button, and landing gear, parking brake, flaps, and everything is actually on and the pedestal is actually created using a very basic controller. This is mostly using joy still, and then connected into the MSFS via Spadnext. I have a lot of video up here in the link or down there in the descriptions on how I set up this cockpit. This is a very fun to play, but this is mostly single monitors using 4K TV, and it was quite good experience. I've created a lot of video about it. I fly around Europe using this setup. I can have actually a yoke when I fly, be Boeing 787 for example, or Cessna or smaller GA aircraft, but I can use A320 side stick and the throttle from Thrustmaster to fly A320 for example. I have several other monitors to support me for recording, for maps, and other application running in the background. So this one is actually quite fun, but still far from real things, right? So I was like like dreaming another next cockpit that I would like to have when just my dream and wishes. So I would like to have like a 1-to-1 scale of cockpit with the more than 120-degree field of view, fully functional switches, fully functional display, the MFD or whatever display in the cockpit is working, and it's also supposed to be close to the real cockpit feel, right? And of course with fully backlit panel for dark operation or during the night flight, kind of those things. So I dreamed that kind of setup. Well, I have a constraint, of course. The budget. I cannot buy a fully built cockpit. It is that costs around like what, 100,000 to 120,000 US dollars. So it's a lot of money, of course. And then also, I would like to build it, but then I would like to have a nice feel of the cockpit itself, like a real thing. So it should be like a DIY quality, but it's also close to the real cockpit in the finishing at least. And durability, well, it's because I'm rarely gonna use it. I was mostly flying in weekend, so I'm quite fine with durability. It doesn't have to be very durable materials like metals, aluminum, whatever. You just need to be quite durable. I made the FA-18 using mostly acrylics, and of course the frame is metal, but the the panel itself is actually acrylics. So those kind of things is okay for me. Time, I wish I can build faster. Last FA-18 cockpit, I built it for a year, 12 months. I wish I can build this time faster, but realistically this is a larger cockpit, a more complicated cockpit, so at least a year or so. Room and space constraint, I have a smaller rooms. I can expand it, but I have to dismantle, construct again the room, so it's kind of a lot of work, and I don't want to go there. So I want to use my hangar 4. So it's H4, it's actually my hangar 4 playing simulations. Special rooms, only like 2.5 meters times 2 meters. So that rooms is being used for the blue room. Remember the previous multi Multi FS2020 Cockpit that is inside those hangar 4 or H4 rooms. So it's very small room, so I want to kind of fit in, but I know the full cockpit will probably have a size larger than that room. So that's part of the constraint or challenges. Flexibility, I need to be able to move this cockpit out or put it aside, and then I put the FA18 cockpit back to the room. Those kind of thing, it has to be like movable, or at least I can push it to somewhere else rather than inside the room, or fix into the room. That's the first idea. I know it's going to be very difficult, and also I was thinking like combining off-the-shelf product and DIY, because I want like to cut short the build time. So if I can combine the build, DIY build, and also from the off-the-shelf product, so I think it could save time, right? So that's some of the idea. I'm choosing an airline's cockpit rather than the well, I can choose the GA like Cessna 172 with the Garmin 1000. You know, it's very versatile, but I want something bigger, something complex, right? I mean, GA is fun to go around and flying around for sightseeing. So I think that's better done in the VR, because I think it gives you more, how do you call it, visual fidelity. I was still waiting for my Pimax Crystal to come. That will provide an alternative flying for GA aircraft or smaller aircraft or jet aircraft, which I can enjoy the scenery. But I would like to have the IFR flying, complex flying of the airlines. It was really kind of a dream that you can do a full procedures for the airlines, right? So I was longing for airlines cockpit, but I was kind of split between Airbus or Boeing, right? Many are building Boeing, but when I look into the cockpit and trying to understand how it works, while I'm playing also MSFS 2020 for 2 years, I realized that actually it's quite complex on the Boeing. A lot of switches, very specific switches, and the yoke itself is, you know, it's very cumbersome. It's very huge, and it will give me more challenges in terms of creating the physical construction of the cockpit. So I choose A320 because this is the aircraft that I fly early on in FS 2020, because it's free, and also fly-by-wire is a fantastic product. So I start with the A320 fly-by-wire. Okay, so I used to fly already on Airbus, and when PMDG come with Boeing 737, I haven't got a chance to learn it, because I have to relearn everything, the procedures and the switches and everything. So I haven't really kind of accustomed to it. So finally I choose the A320 to build the cockpit of A320 Neo. By that time I already bought a Phoenix A320 also, the modules, but the Phoenix do not allow you to open up the variables, the L4, to be displayed into the cockpit, unfortunately. So it's just giving a flexibility of giving input to the Phoenix but not output. Unfortunately, I cannot get any variables from the Phoenix, right? So at the end of the day, only fly-by-wire give us mostly of the variables open up, so I can read out and then display it in the cockpit, or in terms of the lighting or the whatever required to give a feedback to the physical world, right, from the application. So this is going to be based on fly-by-wire A320 because of the more easier to build relatively. I'll tell you some of the quirks later on especially on the overhead, but in general I think A320 will be a good platform to build. It's more what do you call it, beginner friendly. If you not really beginner level this time, it's actually to me it's much more realistic to build. Okay, much more easier, I guess. So this is the objective and the constraint, right? So based on that, then I create a plan to build the cockpit. Now, before I explain a lot of details and you jump into the bandwagon of DIY excited. I have to put some disclaimer. I'm able to build a complicated cockpit like this because I have some background in electronic engineering, in undergraduates of electronic engineering. So I have a hobby also in electronic, kind of, kits, or building an audio or controller, microcontroller, whatever, back then in the young age. But yeah, that helps a lot because I used to soldering, design PCB schematics, whatever required. So I have some background, a good amount of background, I guess, in electronic engineering. So it helps a lot in realizing this cockpit. I also have some basic programming knowledge. Of course, I'm programming with several basic programming, even including assembly programming at a time for microcontrollers. So I have some logical thinking about that, but not advanced because I'm not keeping up with the up-to-date programming language. So, but the logic is still there. Yeah, I'm also active in PC building myself. I create my own PC, or build my own PC from scratch, and for my gaming PC or whatever PC that I want to build. So I'm quite used to learn about Windows, and also the hardware related to the PC, right? So that helps a lot in when you are working with a DIY cockpit, because you're gonna have found a lot of issues in USB, connections, and its drivers, whatever required, right? So that is going to be fundamental. Um, I do have a lot of another basic skill on woodworking, metal working, welding, and everything, cutting metals, tubes or pipes, and then weld it, and then to create a frame. Those kind of thing I've learned early on when I create my first cockpit of a car racing, for car racing. So yeah, painting, finishing of the multi materials like wood and metal. I've done that also. So that will help you, yeah, to be able to realize what you dream on. I'm also, I think 5 years ago or 6 years ago, I'm starting learning and printing 3D models. I start from the FDM, or filament-based 3D printing. Of course, that's the cheapest one, and then build up my experience toward FDM printing. And I think 3 years ago when I start FA18, or 4 years ago, I think, when I started FA18 cockpit, I start to buy. I bought a resin 3D printing. So that's when I start building knobs, buttons. That's very accurate into compared with the real one. So yeah, 3D printing on with resins help you refine your design. But for bigger things like trim wheel, or I built my own yoke, for example, on the DIY multi FS2020 cockpit. I built a yoke. Actually, the yoke is actually using a 3D printing material. So those skill set will definitely required in the build if you want to go DIY path rather than buying modules. There's a lot of modules actually available in the market. Like you can buy the MCDU modules, the radio panel, audio panel, parking brake panel, or even the whole pedestal or the whole overhead. You can buy it by module or by kit, but that's going to cost you a lot, right? So that's why I'm choosing the DIY mostly. That's why I'm combining several off the shelf also, or another DIY product. So just to make it faster build, so to shorten the time of the build. Okay. So if you start doing DIY, you better start learning to build a very basic controller. I suggest you try to learn using Joy to controllers. That's very good one. Actually, you can do analog, you can do in out, you can do rotary switch, whatever. So it's very versatile programming. Actually, it's quite comparable with a very branded joystick controller. I think it's already gone because it's supposed to be commercially, I know it's not supposed to be free, but it's been around for many years. So I've been able to download several versions, the 2015 and 2016 series. So that two controllers really help a lot. So basically, yeah, you have to be able to understand a lot of things and also have the skills to build before you jump into the DIY. It's going to be very challenging, but it's very good process. I mean, the build process itself is very, very exciting, comparable to the play itself. Because once you able to build and realize your dream or your vision about about the product or about the build that you're gonna try to finish, I think when you finish it, you really enjoy the build itself and the learning process. I think you have to like the learning curve or the learning processes itself. If you don't like to learn a lot of things, I don't think DIY is your choices. If you just want to play, you can just buy off the shelf. Of course, you have to sacrifice the realisms. But if you really enjoy the build, learning process, learning a lot of things along the way, I think that's a good exercise that by itself is actually an activity that enjoyable if you like it. But if you don't like it or you are impatient or you don't have the patience to wait the process, forget it, okay? Because it's really demand a lot of patience and learning and whatever, and it takes me another years to build this one, okay? It's actually quite fast compared to the others, but actually it's a half cockpit. I'll tell you why later on, but yeah, I mean, it's a very enjoyable build, okay, for me at least. So let's next is going to be the DIY build process video. The video I'm going to split into at least 10 parts because I'll talk about details on each part. I'm going to start from the overall design. I'm going to show you how I'm going to starting the design process of the cockpit using SketchUp, collecting a lot of photo materials, measurements, everything, and then put it into the SketchUp, and then from there I start to build the design, the structural design in SketchUp also, okay? And then try to pre-plan the design first, but then the first module of panels that I built actually not by creating the structure itself first, but from starting the overhead panel first. So it's quite because why I'll tell you why, because of the Cori switch. It has 100 Cori switch, so I need to build that one first, because if that fail, probably not going to be worthy to continue the build, right? So that's the first hurdle that I need to overcome, which is the overhead switch, overhead panels with a lot of Cori switch. After that, it's actually quite faster and easier. Continue with the MIP or Master Instrument Panel, the FCU and FS, the above the MIP, and then continue with the center pedestal, left console, and then of course we're going to talk about the display, where I'm using a TV rather than projectors, and then slightly touch with the main PC, because I already have a video about main PC, but I'm going to talk about why I'm building a specific PC for this one also. And other systems, I'm going to talk about the like the audio, the camera, the webcam that I'm using all around to give a different view, and Stream Deck controllers and other setup that I'm using to help me create a good experience and a good video, I guess, in the process of recording a lot of activity inside the cockpit. So yeah, 10 parts. It's going to be a lot of discussion and talk about the build, okay? So I'm going to stop here. There's a link above to go to the next video, which is part 1 of this build, which is the overall design. So see you there.